We did another live last night, and thank you to everybody who tuned in. I was watching the boxing card and the BKFC Bare-Knuckle fight card simultaneously. For me, by far, the highlight of the evening was Ben Rothwell's one-punch counter walk-away KO of his opponent. With that win, Ben won the World Championship for BKFC at heavyweight. That was in the co-main event on the BKFC card in Philadelphia. Now, in the main event, I was actually quite surprised by the outcome. Jeremy Stephens stopped Eddie Alvarez with a couple of very hard counter shots. He dropped Eddie once. Eddie got up, beat the count, said he was fine, gave the thumbs up. But on the second drop, Eddie just took a knee, basically, and it was right at the end of the round. So when Eddie went back to his corner, I'm not sure if it was Eddie's decision to retire or Eddie's corner's decision to retire. But congratulations to Jeremy Stephens. He just placed some very well timed and precise short counter shots that dropped Eddie. Now, in all honesty, up until the point where he got stopped, I thought Eddie Alvarez was putting on the better performance in terms of just output and putting his combinations together. But that goes to show you that all it takes is one shot, and you can change your life with one shot. Now, also of note was you could really tell that Ben Rothwell and Jeremy Stephens are UFC veterans, because in their post-fight interviews, they were super high energy, super animated. They really knew how to play to the crowd, and so they represent that BKFC promotion really well. On the boxing card, I would say I was most impressed by the performance of Eddie Cruz from Cuba. He just showed so much sophisticated footwork and head movement in his fight in the co-main event on the Diego Pacheco Steve Nelson undercard. Eddie Cruz is the type of fighter that I would tell a young up-and-coming fighter, hey, watch this guy. Watch how he uses his footwork. Watch the rhythm of his punches. Watch how he times his head movement with his counter punches. I felt that Eddie Cruz was just on a completely different level than his opponent. He had not only superior footwork, he had superior output. He controlled the ring. He had really wonderful defensive head movement, timed with counter shots. He worked both the head and the body. And towards the end of the fight, say in the last 3 rounds, he did start to switch stance a little bit, which wasn't really necessary for him to do that in order to secure the win. But I'm guessing that he just felt he was comfortably ahead, and so, why not try another little wrinkle in his game out? Now, the only thing I would say about that is, sometimes a seasoned boxing trainer will tell you, to stay away from doing that in the final rounds of a fight that you are handily winning, just because you do not want to take any extra chances. But I'm also guessing, since Eddie is from Cuba, that he's gone through years and years of sparring practice. He's one of those Cuban fighters that's also very athletic and can probably I'm sure he can execute a lot more sort of showboating type moves than he would ever show us in the actual fight ring. I mean, not quite like a Guillermo Rigondeaux, but he kind of reminded me of him. Now, the main event was Diego Pacheco, who's a really tall lanky fighter. He fought Steve Nelson, and there was a little bit of social media hype because there was a supposed shove at the weigh-in. I mean, in all honesty, I think they were just trying to hype the fight, because I've never paid attention to either fighter before I watched them last night. So this was a typical matchup between a tall, lanky fighter and a sort of shorter, stockier Steve Nelson. Steve did win the first few rounds simply on output, because Pacheco was, quite frankly, pretty inactive, would just occasionally throw out a single jab and move. To his credit, Steve Nelson did do the right thing in terms of using a lot of upper body movement to move his head off the center line. He would use his upper body movement to try to feint motions, and then he would he was the one sort of pressing the action, especially in the early rounds. He was pursuing Pacheco. But as the fight wore on and Diego decided to pick up his output, just the fact that he had that nice long jab, he would land that 1-2 on Steve Nelson. Now, earlier on in the first half of the fight, Diego was able to open up a small cut on Steve Nelson's left eyebrow. And unfortunately for Nelson, even though it wasn't a sort of fight-threatening deep cut, just the fact that he'd always be wearing this blood, at least on the left side of his face, it's just a bad optic as the fight continued. A small cut like that, even if someone just glances it, they don't have to hit it hard. A glancing blow will just get the blood flowing again, and it just looks bad to the audience, right? I'm being a little bit critical of Diego Pacheco because I feel that even though he won the fight quite clearly, there was not that extra spark there that I would want to see from somebody who's potentially going to make a run at a world title. I felt that Pacheco just did enough to win, but wasn't going to take a lot of risk and wasn't going to really lay it all out there on the line. On the other hand, I felt that Nelson just kept pressing the action and fighting to the end. In fact, we could argue that maybe he won the last 2 rounds. Now, in the last 2 rounds, there was a lot more sort of dirty boxing in that when Nelson would close distance and get inside, both fighters would wind up clinching and then trying to hit each other with the free hand. And I almost wish that Nelson had started using that type of tactic a little bit earlier on in the fight, just to let Pacheco know, hey, you are in fact in a fight. I'm not backing down. I'm just coming for you. The other 2 little pieces of criticism I would have of Diego Pacheco is that he does give away his height because he's for whatever reason, he decides to lower himself so he can punch a little straighter at his opponent's head. So he's got his feet kind of wide. That limits his mobility. And then in terms of defense, he'll tend to roll away to his right side pretty severely and very consistently. So when he gets in there with somebody who knows how to read that and maybe can time it for a leaping left hook, he might get caught with something. You never want to show your head movement only to one side and not the other. You've got to mix it up just so your opponent doesn't know which way you're going to slip or roll. So in terms of who looked most impressive in their wins, I would say Pacheco's 4th place, Jeremy Stephens is in 3rd place, Eddie Cruz 2nd place, and Ben Rothwell 1st place for most impressive win last night. Now, of note, I think that Eddie Alvarez did look impressive in his loss, and Steve Nelson also looked impressive in his loss. So tell me about what you thought about the fights last night. What were the highlights for you?